Welcome everyone to session 2 of Academic Integrity Awareness Week. This will be our student discussion panel on all things academic integrity. So this will be called Academic Integrity Mythbusting, and it's part of sort of our greater scope of things that we're running this year. This is our first Academic Integrity Awareness Week ever, so we're very much learning as we go. So please be kind to us and enjoy today's session. My name is Tara Starbird, and I'm from the ANU Library, and I'm joined by many people today who I will introduce later, who will be helping answer your questions and also probably asking a few as well. Okay, so just a quick note that we will be recording this session so that anyone who can't attend will be able to watch it. The interactive questions component will be anonymous, so you don't have to worry about having your face or name on camera. But there's also opportunity to engage with the chat, and we really do encourage you to do so. I would just say that if you are going to open the chat, make sure you click to all panelists and attendees. Otherwise, it just goes to me, and that's a bit boring. Okay, so before we begin, as always, we want to acknowledge and celebrate the people on whose traditional lands that, well, I am meeting today, which is the Ngunnawal people, and pay respects to elders past and present, and also pay respect to the elders of the lands that you are tuning in from today, which are many and varied. All right, so our participants today, and I hope I have included everyone, is Professor Royston Gustafsson, who is the Dean of Academic Quality, Dr. Vivian Sylvie, who is from Academic Skills, Dr. Tanya M. Colwell, do you prefer the M? College of Arts and Social Sciences, Dr. Rose, I hate the German names, I'm very sorry. Alfeld from the ANU College of Science. Myself, Tara Starbird. We also have Emily Yam and Hassan Riaz from the ANU Students Association, and Ninad Bhatt from the Postgraduate Students Association. So we have a nice big group today. Today's session, we're going to just talk about some burning questions that people have about academic integrity. And then Royston Gustafsson is going to host the panel where we will go over some of the common myths about academic integrity and ask our panel to contribute. And then we will go to an Ask Me Anything at the end so that anyone here can ask a specific question that they're curious about. We'll also share you some resources that you can use to get help with your academic studies and ensure that you are writing and doing your assessments with the utmost academic integrity, and to show you what's available from the university generally. All right, so what we're going to do is do a quick mentee. So what mentee is a site that you can go to from your mobile device or even your computer. So if you go to mentee.com right now, I will give you a code that you can use to answer this question. So the first question is, what confuses you most about academic integrity? And I will put that code, we'll get that code into the chat as well. So that is 6145-4884. 6145-4884. So you just put that into the mentee.com and it will give you a list of things. So I'm going to write mine in. Okay. Oh gosh, typing and looking up is hard. I get this question a lot. What do we have so far? How to have original thoughts / ideas when it feels like everything has been done already. That's a very good one. How do I quote general knowledge? My parents edit my assignments. Is this okay? Help for writing. Do different courses have different rules? What happens if I read something and then think it's my own idea later on, forgetting what I've read? When two authors have similar ideas. I have seen that many times. I'll write this one too. I certainly get a lot of questions about, how do you cite more diverse information sources that aren't just a book or a journal? And people want to know, how do I actually cite a YouTube video that I'm referencing, or things like that. So when I have an identical idea to an author, when to reference and when not to reference words and ideas. Accidental plagiarism, that's a big one. I think not everyone sets out to plagiarize something or do something nefarious. It just does happen sometimes. Yeah, common knowledge, that's definitely one. and forgetting what you've read. You read so much in your study, particularly postgrads and HDR students. How do you remember everything you've written? Now, these are some really good ones. Okay, so I'm going to move on to question 2. What do you hope to get out of this session? So if you're there, it should just say go to the next slide, and then you can put that in. And I'll put one in for my one. Okay, so a better understanding of the rules, where to get help. Clarity on what rules apply to my discipline. I think that's a really good one. We do see different rules in different disciplines, and also different assessments have different rules. There may be ones that have a lot of collaboration and a lot of group work implicit in it, and that's perfectly fine. And there may be ones where you want to be entirely separate, and that's also really important to note. Yeah, how to do group work without committing misconduct. How can I check my writing? Can someone in this session tell me how to positively encourage showing integrity? All the ways to encourage people are usually negative. Yeah, bad grades, expulsion. Yeah, so how do we build a culture of positivity around behaving ethically? I think that's a really good one. What help am I allowed to get with my assignments? That's a big one. I know a lot of people, maybe throughout high school, have their parents help them edit a lot of their assignments. Is that allowed at a university level? I think that's a really good one. So these are some really great ones. I'll move back to the PowerPoint. And what I'll do when I provide these slides to everyone, I will take some screenshots of these so you can see the questions and things that came up. And this will also help us inform future versions of this to know what are people's concerns and how can we find answers for them for you. Okay, excellent. Thanks for that. And now I will turn over to Professor Royston Gustafsson, who is the Dean of Academic Quality, and he will have a little chat before we begin the panel. So over to you, Royston. I'll mute myself.
Thank you, Tara. So I'd like to welcome everybody to today's session. The fact that we're talking about myth busting, the fact that there are so many questions which we've already seen raised during the beginning of this session is because while that some things in academic integrity are black and white, such as, directly quoting material, it's very clear. There are many things that are grey areas and which with experience you get to know, but especially for those with less experience can be really confusing, and hence a lot of the questions that we've seen. As such, a working party is currently working on a set of best practice principles for academic integrity. We're hoping that they will go to academic board for consideration on 3rd of December. And some of the questions that have already arisen are things that we haven't yet addressed. And so, this is your great opportunity to also raise things that where we need to think about preparing FAQs or putting into the best practice principles. So this is an opportunity to feed into that document so that we understand the scope of things that we need to include in that document. I'd also point out that significant changes to our approach to academic integrity are starting on the 1st of December, where we replace the current academic misconduct rule with the new academic integrity rule. So as not to confuse things, given that at the moment you're all bound by the current rules. Everyone will be bound by the current rules for all courses. Current courses, the new rules only apply to courses that start on or after the 1st of December. What we're saying today will be based on the current rules. Occasionally I may pipe in and say, please note this will be changing. So have a look at the new documents that come out in December. Though I won't be going into what the exact nature of the change because I don't want to risk confusing anyone. So be aware that today we're very much focusing on the current environment, but that significant changes will be taking effect from the 1st of December. And it's hoped that those changes will both help us build a stronger culture of academic integrity, but also clarify some of the issues that we'll be discussing today. So thank you.
Thank you, Royston. That's excellent. So I think it's really good to know that there are future changes coming and trying to address some of the situation, like people were mentioning in there, that it's often about punitive, about threatening people with punishment, but the new direction that it's taking appears to be a lot more focused on integrity and ethics and sort of promoting a culture of that within the uni, and sort of less on the punitive measures. So I think that's really good. Okay, so we'll get into some myths right now. So we're going to open this up to the panelists. I'm going to pop myths up, and just give me a little wave if you'd like to speak, and unmute your mic and give your sort of comment on this myth. Some of them may be true, some of them may be false, or like we talked, that gray area situation. So myth number 1. If I copy text from a source but reference it, this is not plagiarism. Any takers?
I'll go.
Yep.
So yeah, this is kind of comes up when people are writing essays and they're talking about things like paraphrasing some material. So sometimes they might copy the text or copy the ideas and think that because they've copied it from a source that might not be an appropriate kind of academic source, or they might think of it as common knowledge, they might not necessarily need to reference it. But actually that's a mistake. So whenever you do use other people's ideas, whenever you do use information or even data like images, figures, graphs, etc., whenever you copy and paste, you will need to reference it, and you will need to follow the standard conventions about whether you're quoting or whether, for instance, for a figure or a table, you need to cite that particular material.
Excellent. And Tanya wants to go next.
Look, I just endorse everything that Viv's just said, but add that whilst it's great to reference the text as a way of acknowledging that the idea has come from another source, the words themselves are also part of the intellectual property that belong to the author of that particular study and source. So you're acknowledging, by appropriately formatting that extracted copied text, as well as referencing it, you're acknowledging both the idea and the words as the work of somebody else and their intellectual property.
Yeah, excellent. Anyone else? Or I will move on to the next one, which is an interesting one that I like. It is fine to add the references after I've written the assignment. I said, and my husband is very guilty of this, just typing up a thing and then going and finding the sources in his undergrad study. So what is the issue with this? Is this fine? Are you ready to jump in, Tanya? I noticed you're unmuted.
Yeah, if that's okay. Yeah, please. I have some thoughts. Look, I'd really encourage people to avoid adding the references after the essay has been drafted the first time. I think raises too many possibilities of possibly forgetting where the sources have come from, where the information's come from, and so introduces the possibility that information may not be referenced at all or appropriately acknowledged. I think even if drafting really roughly the first time, if students can get into the practice of including, just for their own purposes in their own rough draft, a bracketed note of the author, short title or the date of the work that they're citing, and the page number that the referencing is coming from, and then when they go back to revise and polish that draft, then they know where that information has come from, they know where that set of information has come from. And from my perspective, I really encourage people to get into the practice of developing a reliable note-taking practice. And so this is where you'd have a set of notes which remain separate from your essay drafts. So you draft as a separate file from your essay notes, but in your essay notes, you might have the bibliographic citation or a footnoted formatted citation for a source. You might have an argument that's paraphrased. And then below that, alongside specific page numbers, you could identify the piece of information or the quote that you found particularly useful or relevant for that particular essay, which means that, you've always got those page numbers alongside the relevant information, the relevant quotes, the relevant evidence in a separate file from your essay draft. and so that you can add that directly into your draft as you go along. I think it just helps to avoid introducing potential errors later down the track.
Excellent. I noticed Rose would like to go next, so please go ahead.
I was going to say something, but then Tanya covered everything very nicely. So
all good. I think it's a funny one. I don't meet many people who do this, but I do probably encounter like 1 in 20, 30 students who do this technique. They're often very intelligent and very well read, but I just don't understand the confidence level of doing it. I probably do the opposite.
If it works for you,
yes,
then there's nothing ethically wrong with it, but the chances of you making a mistake and just like ignoring something and then having plagiarism is quite high. And if you're willing to take that risk, then it's on you. But we would suggest that you don't do it.
Yeah, exactly. It's a real interesting one.
I've also seen a few students in appointments where they've given themselves, 2 hours to do their referencing right at the last, stage before they submit their essay. Referencing takes a long, long time because it's quite detailed. So it just doesn't give you enough time. And I have actually had students say, unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut out this idea because I can't find the source again. I knew I had looked at it, but that's why Tanya's ideas about note-taking and, keeping the bibliographic information as you go is really, really useful, and keeping your thoughts as you go. It's really,
and I think a lot of people wouldn't associate really good note-taking with academic integrity, but I think that's a really good point is, keeping track of yourself. I really I'm a bit overly organized. I like to keep track of my argument, keep track of the themes that I'm coming across. Even if they may not be relevant to that assignment, I do kind of like to track the themes, and that really helps me keep on track. But also then in a later assignment, I'm like, no, I've read about these themes because here's my notes. And I think, really good note-taking is a surprisingly useful tool in your AI kit bag. That's a really good one. Thanks.
So I did want to add that the note-taking becomes super important as you go further through your studies, as you're doing more work and you doing projects that last over longer amounts of time. It becomes more and more important to take good notes so that you 6 months down the track is able to understand what you've done. So during your undergrad and early postgraduate studies is a great time to develop those habits that you can make use of later on.
Yes, I call that being nice to future you. I always say, sometimes I've done something really organized and I go, thanks, past Tara. This is so helpful. It's like pre-preparing meals for yourself. All right, so the next one, I can help a friend to draft their essay if they are having trouble. And I might start with Viv because I know this is academic skills area. So what would you say to someone who has said this?
Yeah, so this is one of those grey areas. It's totally fine to talk with people about your ideas and to talk with people about your thoughts, particularly if you're in the same course. That's the purpose of tutorials or labs, is to talk about the ideas. Of course, then the grey area becomes more and more touchy if you start kind of writing on the same type of document. So if, for instance, your friend wants feedback on their draft, what I'd suggest is actually make a time to meet with them and just talk about the questions that you had and so on. And be careful about when you suggest an idea. If a friend, for instance, suggests an idea to you and you take that idea and you pop that in your own essay, and that friend happens to have the same idea in their own essay, then that's likely to have some kind of match, or the lecturer might see that as being too similar. So actually what you could do is, again, think about it as, how can I make this idea my own? How can I do more research? How can I find out more about it, think more about it, consult further sources? And shameless plug, come and see us as well. We can help you with your essays. We can read your drafts and give you feedback, and we won't breach academic integrity that way. Rose, what do you think?
So I'm obviously from a very different area, not only from science, I'm from physics. And so a lot of our assignments, rather than being essays, are essentially problem solving. So more or less doing maths. And we strongly encourage students to collaborate on those assignments. But really, the litmus test you need to set for yourself is, if someone has helped you with this, is if you've written, this problem down, is that reflective of your own understanding of the problem, right? So if someone helps you understand how to set it up, or what limits you can apply on this, what assumptions you can make, that's fine. But if someone shows you their assignment and you're like, okay, well, the first thing I need to do is integrate this by parts, and then I get this answer, and then they say the next thing I need to do is move my limits, then that's not really representing your own understanding, and that's where we'd start to have issues. So collaboration, certainly in our area, is strongly encouraged, but it's as a learning tool for you as students.
Yeah, I think it's good to have a litmus within each discipline, like you said, Rose, like to know what the acceptable thing is and the not acceptable thing is. And it does differ a bit in disciplines, particularly I know the sciences and engineering, computer science, you know, that's a very different type of creativity that they're working with rather than sort of the standard essay that others are doing. So that's really good. Does anyone have anything on that one, or will I move on to the next myth? I should have numbered these. It's more dramatic. Okay. It is okay to use a commercial editing service for my paper if I wrote the draft myself. So there's a lot of ads. Students get ads constantly for these drafting things. Royston, would you like to give this one a go?
Thank you. No, it's not okay to use a commercial editing service. A key part of learning to write is learning to express yourself clearly. A lot of essays also have part of the mark for the expression, accuracy, you know, layout of the bibliography and so on. And it's simply not possible for a marker to determine what part of the final product you're responsible for and what part of the final product the commercial editor is responsible for. So, you know, if you discuss a particular point with somebody, you can reference that in a footnote and say, you know, I'd like to thank so-and-so for discussing this issue and helping me clarify my thinking. But here, you can't really disentangle these two. Now, I know that commercial editing services are used for HDR students, for PhD students, but remember that a PhD is regarded as a publication. So, and assignments are not publications. So commercial editing services, it's okay to use them for things that are published, because at that level, what's being focused on is, you know, the significant and original nature of the contribution to knowledge. Whereas in assignments, part of the skill that's being developed is to actually edit your own work. So no, you should not use commercial editing services for your assignments. That doesn't mean that you can't take advice, you can't discuss this with somebody, but there's a very big difference between somebody actually working on a written document and having a conversation with somebody. And it's also quite different if you go to academic schools where questions may be raised. That's the issue with commercial editing services. They normally do the work for you rather than raising questions. So thank you.
Excellent. Well, I might move on to the next one. Expressing other words in your own words is less elegant, so direct quoting is better than paraphrasing. Rose, that was very quick.
So I guess this comes up, I think, a lot in the sciences, because we feel like we're talking about, you know, if someone has expressed something that's a fact and they've used very precise words to do that, and you can often feel like there isn't a better way of expressing it. Typically what I find when students bring me things that they're like, well, but this person said it so clearly, is that they said it clearly in their context for their purpose in their particular document, and that perhaps is not exactly suitable for your purpose in your document. So you're always better off trying to write specifically to what you're trying to say. We don't quote in the sciences pretty much ever, so it is very much about paraphrasing and really messaging the meaning to contribute to what you want to say.
Nice. Tanya, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Rose. I agree with Rose for the sciences, but for the humanities as well, actually, we'd encourage people to more often paraphrase another source rather than to quote directly for a few different reasons. But one of the main reasons is that teaching yourself to paraphrase effectively and efficiently is a good skill to develop. You can often express something much more concisely than a published work might be able to do so, but it also demonstrates to yourself and to your reader the extent to which you've understood the source that's being used. in that way. And so we would tend to recommend keeping direct quotations to a minimum in the humanities, particularly to use those quotes where they're particularly illuminating on a particular issue, or they express something particularly pithily where you feel you can't re-express that idea in a more elegant or a more concise way. But we'd certainly encourage people to paraphrase much more regularly than to use direct quotations in their own essays.
Yes, that's a really good point. I think when I did a lot of high school teaching, they really hated paraphrasing because it was much easier to quote. And I did a lot of exercises that involved them, like imagine you're telling it to your mum or to your parents, write that in very colloquial language, like, so this dude, Henry VIII, right? And when they wrote that in their colloquial language, I then sort of showed them how to then make it academic, but they found it much easier writing how they would tell their friends about it rather than trying to write it in an academic voice immediately. Particularly for undergrads, I think, don't try to sound like a lecturer on your first essay. Get it out in your own words and then add the academic language around that. And it can be quite fun, especially in history, and all those ones where you're sort of telling it like a pub tale.
Exactly. And that's the thing, forcing yourself to express it directly to somebody else to explain the idea is the best way of sort of testing your own understanding of that idea and getting them to question you about that idea. So I think, that's a really great way of thinking about it.
I've seen some really good creative ones of like creating memes to describe like a political theory and, and then sort of getting people to think like, yes, you have the means to express this more complex topic. And then you add the academic language once you've made it yourself. So there's a lot of fun ways to get people thinking like that, but it is, I think, quoting is a bit of a crutch, that it is just much easier to just quote people's own exact words.
And if I can jump in as well,
sure.
The note-taking methods are really useful there that Tanya and Rose were talking about before, is if you're starting to paraphrase something yourself, tell yourself in your notes when you have done a paraphrase yourself so that you can go back to it and, rework it, double check it, make sure it actually communicates the idea in a clear way.
That's a really good point, Vivian. All right, the next one. If Turnitin says my essay is not breaching copyright, I am not in breach of the rules. What do people feel about this one?
I'll jump in here. Turnitin is not perfect and it's not foolproof. So Turnitin will highlight things that are text matches to sources that you have not used, or it might completely miss and not highlight any of the sources that you have used. So really use Turnitin with a big grain of salt. Think of it as the number itself, that originality percentage that you get given when you look at your Turnitin report, that is meaningless on its own. What you really need to look through is the sources that you have used, your own words. Do they correspond appropriately or not? So if you're quoting, are they exactly the same as the source that you've used? If you're paraphrasing, is it different enough? And so on the Turnitin practice side, we've got videos and lessons and quizzes and so on to help you identify when text matches are okay or not okay. But yes, do treat Turnitin very carefully.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to say about Turnitin in their discipline? I'm just checking my participants list has disappeared. That's not very helpful. All right, it's a pretty straightforward one, but I think it's really good to reinforce that. And I've certainly, in my younger days, got a higher plagiarism score on a Turnitin assignment, only to discover that by paraphrasing, I had directly quoted someone else. So that was a fun one. Okay, so expressing others' words in your, we've moved back one, sorry about that. It is okay to share my previous assignments with others doing the same course. I think I'll put this one to Royston first, if that's all right, Royston, and then we might let other people comment.
Okay, this is a complex issue. Under the university's intellectual property policy, your students own the intellectual property, you own the copyright in your assessment items. And so you are entitled to share previous assignments with others. But you need to be cautious and think about why somebody wants to see your previous assignment. Because if you share your assignment with somebody else and there are any reasonable grounds to assume that that person may copy it or submit it as their own work, then you may find yourself investigated for colluding with that person, which is a breach of academic integrity. So that could be an example of collusion. Also, remember that just as students own the IP on the assignment itself, any comments from the marker are the IP of the staff member. So you can't share the comments that staff make with others. You can just share your own assignment, but think carefully about why somebody else doing the course wants to see your assignment, and think very carefully about whether or not there may be any issues relating to academic integrity and collusion with doing so. So this is a bit like an answer that we heard to the earlier question about writing and then putting all your references in. Yes, you can do this, but there are risks, and the risks are what the other person may do with that work.
Would anyone else like to comment? No, we're good. So who is a contentious one? And I know students do share things. An academic misconduct outcome will appear on my academic transcript when I graduate. So if you are found to be in breach of academic misconduct, will it appear on your transcript? This is one I've heard people say. Yes, Emily, do you want to go for that?
Yeah, so just to give some context about our role at ANUSA, so Hassan actually just had to step up because he's accompanying a student to an inquiry, like an academic misconduct inquiry.
Oh, good.
So good timing. So just to give some context about our role, we support students through the process. So we don't do any of the stuff that academic skills does, which is to guide through, the assignment itself. But more so when a student does get an allegation of academic misconduct or anything like that, we can guide them through the process. We are very familiar with the rules, the new one and the old one. And so that's where we can support students through the process, but also be the support person as well at any review or inquiry. So with regards to this question, in terms of academic misconduct and whether it will appear on the transcript when they graduate, the short answer is no. So neither the outcome of academic misconduct or poor academic practice will appear on a student's formal academic transcript when they graduate. It will appear in their informal, unofficial transcript that only the university has access to, because they obviously need to keep track of what the student has been doing during their university degree. But in saying that, I do want to say that if, say, for example, a future employee were to ask them, have you ever, gone through this process before? Or if another university asked that question in, their intake or anything like that, that is something that you would have to disclose to them, but it won't be in your academic transcript when you graduate.
That's a good one. Anyone else like to comment on that, or will we move on to the next one? Keeping an eye on hands raised. Okay, it is okay to use my previous work in a new assignment. So I've had this question a few times. I just want to use a few paragraphs from a previous assignment, or I want to, use this assignment with a few tweaks in another subject. Is this allowed? So who'd like to go first on that one? Tanya, you've got your thing ready, so go ahead.
Yeah, look, I understand that the rules around this particular example, recycling of one's own work across assignments, is changing. The rules are changing in certain areas. But in the humanities at the moment, no would be the short answer. A longer answer would be that you could certainly, across different courses, you could certainly draw on research and notes and evidence and things that you might have used in a previous assignment, but it should be used in a different way to address the new question of the new assignment in the separate course. So your use of that material should be developing as your own academic skills in whatever course it is developing over time. Certainly, we would not, in humanities, we would not generally be happy to see students extracting passages from submitted previous works in new assignments, either in different courses. Some courses may be project-based, and so there may be the expectation that certain passages might be repeated across, say, a proposal and then a final research essay. But across different courses, we'd expect new research, new ideas and arguments to be developing, even if the same secondary studies and evidence might be used.
Yep. Would anyone else like to comment on that? Just looking at Royston just in case. Sorry.
I could perhaps make a comment that technically you could cite a previous assignment, put the words in quote marks, and then fully reference it. But then you've got to ask the question, why do we cite? Why do we use the work of others? So we use authoritative work of others, normally work that's been published and which often has been through a peer review process to bolster our own arguments and place them in context. So you need to ask yourself, would I be regarded by my, outside the university as an authority in this area? How significant are my views and would others take them seriously? So perhaps for some master's coursework students, you might actually be a noted authority in a particular area relating to your work. And so it might be appropriate to cite a previous assignment. But generally speaking, ask yourself, would people outside the university regard this as an authority? Would they look at this and say, yes, my new opinion is justified because of what this previous work has said, that this previous work is so significant? And that is possible, but very unlikely to be the case in assessments submitted by a coursework student. As I said, though, it depends on what stage of your career you're at, and the extent to which you build up a national reputation as an expert in your profession.
That's excellent. Thank you, Royston. All right, I will be expelled from university if I commit academic misconduct. That's sort of for our ANUSA and PARSA folks. Yep, go ahead, Emily.
So there is a list of possible penalties that can occur if someone were to get the outcome of academic misconduct and poor academic practice. The list includes, if the matter is being done and dusted at sort of the inquiry level where it doesn't get escalated, one of the harshest outcome would be that they get suspended from the university. In saying that, this is not a common outcome that we've experienced with students. It is very, very rare, and it usually happens only when there's multiple allegations of misconduct that has come up by a single student. In terms of being expelled from the university, this is a possible outcome at the moment in the current rule, if it gets referred to the DVC, if I'm not mistaken. But again, it is a very rare scenario that happens. The more common ones would be usually, reduction in a grade of an assessment or the course itself, something like that. But so what I guess we try to tell students, particularly if it's a first allegation, the very first thing we sort of tell them is, I know the letter has to contain a lot of very serious wording to make sure that students are aware about the situation and how serious it is. But if it's their first, time that they've gone through this process, it is unlikely that they will be suspended or expelled from the university for academic misconduct.
Can I just add to that, Emily? Thanks for the really thorough explanation. Yeah, like Emily said, the majority of cases are to do with accidental plagiarism. So usually when people have misparaphrased or haven't paraphrased enough or haven't done their referencing appropriately. So really, if you are unsure about whether your paraphrasing is appropriate or not, and if you don't know how to reference, do come and see us, do come and get help before any of this kind of stuff happens. And usually when you go through that process of having an allegation of poor academic practice or academic misconduct, you can come and talk with academic skills. We'll talk with you about what happened, how to address it in future, to prevent such situations in future, so that there's heaps of support available.
Yeah, excellent. I think that leads into the next one, which is if I'm accused of academic misconduct, there's nothing I can do. So we're talking about you have academic skills as one of the places you can get support for your future writing. You have ANUSA and PARSA that you can go to if you have an accusation. There's also places like counseling, access and inclusion that you can, access and say, listen, I'm struggling to get this assignment done on time. And that can, give you some help in that area. So you're not tempted to take shortcuts that can lead to an accusation of academic misconduct. There's such a range of support services available. So don't, let yourself get to that minute before something is due when you're looking at, oh, what can I do? There's a lot of support out there for you now. And if you feel like you're not going to be able to get an assignment done because there's just too much on, or there's, other issues that you have, then, contact those services and, make use of them so that you don't have to, try to find those shortcuts. I think that's a really good one. Does anyone have anything else to sort of say about other things they can do? I'm sure academics will say, speak to your lecturer, speak to your supervisors, let them know, things are happening so that you don't end up in a position where you feel like academic misconduct is your only option. I think that's a really important
Obviously, you
one.
can contact PARSA assistants or ANUSA assistants, and they can guide you through the process of what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
Emily has her hand.
Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Just to add to what you've mentioned as well, I guess the other thing is that if the outcome is academic misconduct, so no longer accused, but the outcome is academic misconduct, there's also appeals processes that they can go through where, there'll be an appeals committee that will take place and the hearing will be taking place with, 7 different individuals. So, even after the accusation has been, finalized, there's still options for them to appeal if there are grounds for appealing, that is.
Yeah. Okay, that's really good to know. Thank you, Emily. All right, so we might move on to our last Mentee, which is where participants can put their questions into the Mentee. So I will get that up for everyone. I'll just move on to this next one. So there'll be a new code. That code is, I'm going to put it in at the same time, 4771872. And the question is, ask our panelists anything. So what would you like to do? If I could make that one work, if I could do it properly while looking up, I don't think that's going to work. 471. There we go. Turns out I can't touch text. Okay, so I'm going to pop my one in so that I can join in here. Letting everyone type there. It's actually really hard to type. Oh, just gotta keep. Okay. What are the best texts to use for an assignment? Do I need to dob in other students if I know they're behaving unethically? Am I responsible if I don't? Yeah. What do I do if my classmates are cheating? There's some good ones here. Do we want to start on sort of the cheating aspect? Do we know what is the policy for what we're meant to do if we're aware that there's cheating taking place within a class? Royston, do you want to take that one for the first bit? You're sort of a bit more aware of the policy.
This is a complex issue. First, from the way that the question is phrased, I take it that, this is not an example of collusion in which you yourself are involved, but you become aware of what somebody else is doing. There's always a tension between, not wanting to make enemies of classmates and doing the right thing. But remember that there are significant issues when people cheat, especially in our professional disciplines. What we're doing through assessment is certifying that a particular individual, a particular student has certain knowledge and skills. Just imagine that you go out into a profession and somebody, because they cheated, they haven't done their own work, doesn't have the knowledge and skills that their professional accreditation, that their degree suggests that they have. And, you know, that could actually have very serious implications if, you know, somebody is an engineer or somebody works in the medical field, or even somebody that, you know, is an accountant and providing financial advice. What the implications could be for that cheating. So the impact of cheating is about a lot more than just this particular assessment. It could actually have significant flow-on effects to innocent members of the public, and you need to take that into consideration. So I would suggest that if, you know, someone is cheating, then it is helpful to let the relevant people know. It could be the teaching staff, or you may want to approach one of the student bodies so that advice and support can be given to that person at that time before things get completely out of hand. Because if somebody cheats once, they may do it again. You know, I remember attending a presentation by a very prominent fraud investigator who said, and I've always remembered this, there's no such thing as a small fraud. There's just a big fraud that got caught early. So if we can get people back onto the right path early, I think that's a very good thing.
I think that's a really good point, Royston. And it is a bit tricky, you know, because with the online world and, you know, encrypted messaging and things like that, they can be planning a lot of things behind the scenes, and it's very hard to prove. But yeah, it is hard if you're aware of cheating. That does sort of have a bit of error of complicity. So that is a tricky one. And also, a lot of people, I don't think about the long-term impacts of that. Just like, you know, your social media profile is your digital footprint. If you have used a cheating service or have cheated in a really organized way, you don't know who might bring that back 20 years in the future and use that against you. And it's happened, sadly, quite a lot of times, people who've lost their positions and standing for academic integrity breaches long in their past.
And we also note that with cheating, we're increasingly seeing those that assist a student cheat are then turning around and blackmailing the student for increasingly large sums of money, saying, if you don't keep paying us, we will report this. If anyone is being blackmailed, it is a please come to us to let us help, because this is a distressing situation. And when it comes to blackmail, our primary concern is assisting the student to deal with this situation, because that is actually a far more serious and critical situation than the cheating itself.
Yes. Thank you so much for that, Royston. I think that's good. A lot of students are quite fearful of coming forward, but sort of knowing that there is help out there, I think that's really important to note. Now for a much lighter topic, what are the best texts to use for an assignment? So I do get students asking this a lot. My references aren't scholarly enough. Like, what am I meant to quote in my assignments? Would any of our lecturers like to take a stab at that one? I see Tanya's unmuted, so I will assume you have volunteered.
Sure. I guess the best way to find out in the first instance would always be to talk to your tutor or your convener. They're generally more than happy to talk to you about assignments, sources, scholarship that you should be exploring or that is recommended for, you know, if you're a first year, if you're a later year, for particular topics. That's what we're here for. And we want to talk to people about resources, about how to find out about particular topics, how to develop responses to your essay questions, how to complete your assignments. So absolutely. You'll often have reading lists as well attached to what used to be called course outlines. They might just be called course guides or reading lists now. I think these seem to be often underused by students. So I'd recommend having a look at your Wattle site, checking out whether there are recommended lists of sources for particular topics across the semester, or that are recommended for particular assignments. Usually there'll be some recommended materials available, but absolutely talking to your tutor or your convener in the first instance would be definitely the first
and I would like to say, as a librarian and teacher, talk to your library as well. We have reference librarians who are subject specialists, and you can actually book a one-on-one consult with them to go through the library database, and they'll point you to where the best scholarly sources are for your field. And they're happy to do that, for undergrads as well as for postgrads. There's your personal librarian that you get as part of the HDR support model, and they can really help you find where to go for that information, what journals to focus on, what databases to focus on. And that can be, really helpful. Like, we are experts in information and knowledge storing. So, please use that knowledge that we have that's out there. We have a lot of content that is online, but we also have that one-on-one support as well, which I think for anyone beginning a research project, it's such a good idea to talk to the librarians who understand your subject area. Excellent. We've got a few good ones. So I like the specific. How would I reference in an oral presentation? That's one I've always wondered about. What would our lecture academics say about referencing in an oral presentation?
So I have opinions on this.
Excellent.
So in science, actually, if you sit at a conference and you watch the audience in a scientific presentation and watch what they're writing down the references, because you've said, okay, well, here's where you go to get more information. So you want to think of putting references in a presentation as being useful to the audience. You put them on the slide in which you use them. You never put them at the end, because nobody's going to remember it was reference 27 and be able to write it down when you flash up your slide at the end because you're running a minute late. Typically, you would reference, extra information that people need to get, right? So if you're referencing, in our case, it might be experimental numbers or particular studies results, you would reference those. We would perhaps we wouldn't necessarily reference the same more general knowledge that you might in a written piece of work, right? So it is going to be less things, less references. You might only have a few in a presentation. But just think about, if someone wanted to know more about this, where would they get the information? Put those references in. So
you're saying effectively name drop. You're saying in this presentation, this is eminent scholar, Rose Altfeld, I will pronounce it at some point, and her study did this, so you're saying the reference in that sort of sentence case where you're going to announce the researcher and what the research was in the sentences, not
very much in academic conferences. We would say, there was this really nice work from the Goldman Group in Paris where they measured the coherence time in a magnetic field, and we put the reference on the slide so someone can write it down.
Nice. Yeah. So you're really almost, like I said, you're almost stating that reference, and you have sort of how to find it for the people listening. But I think that's really good, just effectively speaking part of the reference. And Tanya, do you have an opinion about this one?
Oh, look, I'd absolutely agree with Rose. I was just going to start from the basics, and I was just going to say, include the name in your oral presentation. Anne Curthoys, in her study of 19th century migration to Australia, has argued that, and then develop your points from there. So absolutely include them in your oral presentation in some kind of abbreviated way by surname, for instance, and maybe date. And then, but as Rose said, include the full reference as appropriate in your slides.
We've got some interesting ones here. So Royce can probably answer this one quickly. When the new guidelines come out in December, where will I be able to find them?
That will be widely disseminated. We're still working out if we're going to be able to have a new academic integrity website set up by then. Otherwise, they will be available through the policy library, which is where the rule, policy and procedure currently sit. But wherever they are, we'll make sure that there's clear metadata so that you will easily be able to find them on a search.
I like these two questions. There are two postgrad questions we put in from our Eventbrite booking. I think the second one probably is the most interesting, is where do I stand with control over publications featuring my own samples and data? Now, I'm being a librarian, I'm all for open access data and sharing it with as many as possible because that can expand things, but it will depend, I think, a lot on the licensing and how that happened with your work. So, Rose, would you like to comment on that in the sciences first? And then maybe we'll move on to the humanities.
If you haven't published before, you don't necessarily realise, it doesn't occur to you that there is copyright associated with published work. And there is, when you submit a work for publication, there is a particular copyright agreement you go through. And so you want to pay attention to that, or if someone else has submitted the work, you want to find out exactly what the copyright agreement is. It's almost always the case that you're allowed to put anything other than the very final version of an article that you've published on your own personal website on a preprint server. So you can make it available to other people. If you want to take images from your own, like actual figures from your own work, you're still going to need to essentially get copyright permission from the person who holds the copyright, and that might not be you. It depends on the journal.
Yes. I think data sets are particularly big in the sciences. Of people said, yes, but I took that data, so it's my data, and that's a tricky one. Have you come across this before in your practice, Tanya?
Look, I think it'd be more about using, well, I think things are changing, as you're saying, with open access to more preliminary research work in progress, that sort of thing. These issues of control become much more of an issue. As far as my experience goes, it's usually more about how to use, for instance, images and tables and that sort of thing from other people's work. But this is where Rose's comments about copyright. There'll be a whole raft of copyright procedures, protocols, legislation attached. And so it's, I guess, about talking to your journal editors, perhaps, about what you might like to do with your paper, what their processes and procedures might be as well. Yeah, I think just keeping communication open about what's expected, what the journal expects, but yet retaining what you think is integrity of control over your own material. These works in progress papers are, points in question. I think they're an interesting kind of intermediate ground between a publication and not a publication. And then the question becomes, how then do other people use my work in progress paper as opposed to a fully published piece of material? So communication with the people in, the relevant people.
I think that's really good. And for the first question, how do I write for journal publication with integrity? Another shameless plug for Academic Skills. They do journal writing for the different types of journals. So they do it in the sciences, in business and economics, humanities. So there's a diverse range of training offered on our Eventbrite page. So do check it out. And they really go into even literature review, publishing for various journals, a range of topics. So yeah, and now that Academic Skills is merged with library, it will be sort of a whole suite of content that is all things research, all things publishing, all in one place. So it'll be really exciting. I think that's great. That's a good segue to move on because we are at time. I know we started a little late, but I don't want to go too far over time. Try to keep to that punctuality we talked about at the beginning. Okay, so just a quick note on where to get help, and you will be provided with these slides, anyone who signed up for this, and also it will be available generally on the website. But there's ways to understand academic integrity. There's training available. So there's a Waddle unit you can do on academic integrity, and I encourage you to promote this with students as well and with other staff. And there's also the training that we provide just through Academic Skills, and I think that's going to be really useful. I've put Anusa and Parsa's assistance emails there that you can contact them if you have been accused of misconduct or you have questions about it. And if you need adjustments to your exams, I've given the link to Access and Inclusion, exams and assessments, I should say. Also, again, shameless plug for the rest of the events of the week. We have exams and academic integrity, so all about online, and if we ever do them again, in-person exams. That will be tomorrow, same time. Then Thursday is writing with academic integrity, and we'll sort of do a mix of both undergrad and postgrad. So that will be really good. All your questions about improving your writing and writing with academic integrity. And then a staff one for how to design assessments and exams that promote academic integrity and embed that in. So it's not just students focusing on this. Lecturers are also focusing on how to improve their practice and improve these principles throughout the teaching cycle. And we are running a hot desk throughout the week where you can log in via Zoom and ask a specific question, and one of our learning advisors or librarians will talk you through an answer to your specific question. So that information is there, and that can also be found on our Eventbrite page. And that was a doozy, but thank you everyone for coming so much. I really appreciated all the questions, and I want to thank all my co-hosts today for making the time to come along and answer these questions and, contribute their knowledge. It was very, very helpful. It would have been very dull with just me sitting here yammering on. So I really appreciate you guys coming, and here's some ways to contact us if you have further questions. But we will wrap, and you will get a recording and a PDF of all the slides and materials as well. So all there available for you, but thank you to everyone for coming.